In opening of today's show, I have something here to show you, Charla, that I'm wondering if you can relate to this, okay? So, this will be visual for everyone on YouTube. Those listening on audio apps, just kind of tune in and try to imagine here. But here I am, super happy, just got out of bed. I've got my phone and I'm ready to make some amazing art today. I'm feeling the possibilities. I open my phone and I go on my favorite social platform and begin to scroll, maybe getting ideas, getting inspiration. And then it happens. I am so deflated. I start to see it all. Everyone's better than me. They're making better art. They're doing better things with their life. Their accounts look better. They look more successful. And I'm starting to see my project and what I was about to do today through totally new eyes. And it's pathetic. It's pathetic. And I get down and I can't face what I want to do.
You're just
And
completely deflated.
I'm totally deflated because I have just compared myself to the whole wide world of talented internet out there. And I want to know from you, from the artists listening, how many projects have you lost to comparison? How many times have you opened the phone or some other way of viewing other artists out there and let it kill your creativity, and you say to yourself, my art is bad, their art is good, my art is bad? Comparison kills creativity every single time. Can you relate?
I was trying to come up with a sarcastic remark and be like, no, I never do that. But I could feel it so deeply in the pits of my stomach as you explain it that I can't even make a joke about it. It's like it's
No.
so real, and it doesn't matter how much I believe in my work or even how much I love a piece. If I let myself go there, it will happen every single time. There's not one time where that will not happen
Yeah.
ever.
If you let yourself go to the place of comparing where you're looking and you're saying their art is good, my art is bad, and you are comparing that every single time, it will deflate you. It will bring you down. You just cannot succeed as a creative in the wholeheartedness. Charla and I talk about being a wholehearted artist. You can't succeed in the wholeheartedness of who you are in your being, to the core of your being, if you are comparing and comparing in that sense. Now, here's the really interesting thing about comparison is it's not all bad. It's not all bad. Actually, it's a really powerful, incredible tool for us to use because it's natural. We actually see that it's natural just from watching children learn how to talk and walk. The way
Mhm.
that they do it is they begin to compare. They look at their parents' legs, say, "Oh, those legs walk around and go places. I got two of those. I'm gonna, or
Oh,
whatever." And then
yeah.
they look and they're like, "I'm gonna try that out," and they begin to make the moves to grow, to talk, to become the individual that they are by comparing to the world around them and giving it a shot.
Mhm.
So in that regard, comparison's good. But there's this whole other ugly side of comparison, that ugly side where we look and we judge ourselves as bad because we're thinking everyone else's art is good. So what
Yeah.
is that all about?
I think it's to do with the way that you approach comparison.
Mm-hmm.
If you and I think we do it, I mean, when it really comes down to it, most people in the world, except for a select few, and there's not really that many nice names for them, but there's a select few people that don't really compare themselves, that don't really have this issue. But the majority of people in the world have self-esteem issues to some degree or another. Some people have it really poor, they have really poor outlook on themselves, their physical looks or their abilities. And then there's like, it's like a spectrum, right? And then you get right up to the other side of where you get like egotistical people who think that there's no one better than them. You don't really want to be there either.
Yeah.
But because we all have a self-esteem issue or a confidence issue or a critical issue with ourselves, when we usually take the approach of comparison in a negative way, like when we go on social media, it's a known issue with social media, is that you instantly think they're awesome, that must mean I'm not.
Mhm.
And
Like,
we
look how
do
many
that.
followers they have. That makes them so successful,
Yeah.
and then we're
Yeah.
comparing and feeling
Yeah.
negative about ourselves.
And in every way, like you do it as a mother, as a woman, as a business owner, as an artist, as a homeowner, a studio. Like people compare my studio because they think, like we talked about this in a couple of podcasts ago, about if I put up a photo where it looks too clean, they get upset about it. But what I actually think they're doing is they're comparing it to their own experience, and their studio's messy. Most of the time my studio's messy, my studio's clean, so they get upset, and
Mhm.
they're comparing my studio with theirs, and usually it ends negatively and they have negative responses. And I know that's simply because the approach that they've taken in looking at a photo of my studio,
Mhm.
and it's usually to do with your own self-esteem.
Mhm.
So it's the approach of comparison, and comparison is natural, we all do it, so there must be a natural part to it. And when something is natural, I like to think there must be good in it. I believe that God created everything and God is good. So everything is good until it's not good anymore, because it can be turned into bad or evil or whatever you might want to call the other side of the spectrum. But if it's natural, then there must be a good side to a thing.
Mhm.
So what is the good side to comparison, and how can it be used for good? I think
Mhm.
that would be
Well, I'm
a
so
good
glad that you
standard.
brought up the studio comparison, because that's actually the perfect example for you and I to use, because our studios can't be more different.
Yeah.
And so Charla's is a modern, brand new facility. Like, totally, like the floors do not squeak when you walk across her floors, meaning the floorboards. Here at my studio, in an old theater built in 1948, or something in the 40s, everything's rickety, squeaky, it's different, got all these quirks, and our studios can't be more different, so simply you can't compare. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I wanted to say today to artists, is that we have to remember the apples to apples, oranges to oranges analogy. You can't compare an apple to an orange. You can't
Mhm.
compare anything that's completely different. If you're an artist who's working from your home on your dining room table, which I have done for numerous years of my life, I called my studio a Rubbermaid tote studio, because everything packed into Rubbermaid totes and put under the table. And then when dinner was over, everything came back out again. And that's how I functioned, and I was thankful, but I could have never opened social media and compared myself to you, because there wasn't any comparison. Now I could compare myself to you, but here's the thing, is I shouldn't, because we're not comparing apples to apples.
Mhm.
It's a completely different scenario. So when we're scrolling and deflating and feeling pathetic because we're comparing to someone on the other side of a screen, we don't know their life situation. We don't know anything really about them except what they let filter through on the media. The only thing we're responsible for is our own selves. We can only
Mhm.
compare to us. And
Mhm.
even when you use apples to apples, there's a zillion different kinds of apples out there.
Yeah,
So
it's
you're
still
gonna,
really hard to.
compare the Granny Smith to the Red Delicious. It's not even a comparison.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you can only truly compare to you. We have to um, use our comparison carefully. Now, you had asked me for some applicable examples. We were chatting about it. And you're like, what's a good example of comparison? I was trying to think of one that was like a little different than comparing, that you can't compare studios. And that night I walked through the kitchen. My husband was flipping pancakes, and he flipped a pancake, and he says, because he goes hunting with a certain friend, and he goes hunting and camping, gold panning out in the bush. And so they cook their own breakfast over the campfire and everything. So he flips this pancake and he says, I don't know why, but Ryan's pancakes are always better than mine. And I heard the comparison.
Yeah.
And I thought about how we are always doing that, whether it's flipping a pancake or painting a picture, we're always comparing. But then I had this aha moment where I realized that the comparing is an indicator to us. When Steve flipped the pancake and saw, I just can't make pancakes as good as Ryan, what it is an indicator that he has some growing to do. And he has some
Steve, are you
practice.
listening?
Were you listening to last week's podcast about daily practice? But he has some pancake flipping practice in order to reach the point where he can compare his
But he
pancake
might be
flipping skills.
comparing his home cooked pancake on a stove to one I'm imagining cooked over a fire
Totally different.
outside. They
Yeah.
taste completely different.
Yeah.
So, like, to be able to make a pancake in that situation and taste the same as something made when you're in the woods hunting, like,
Mhm.
there's so many variables that make that pancake delicious that you can't even really recreate in your own kitchen at home.
No, but here it showed me that we use it as an indicator to say, I have to step up. So
Yeah.
then that is good in a
Yes. Okay.
sense,
Yeah.
because
I
I find
agree.
that good because
Yeah.
it made him go, like, if I actually want to flip a good pancake, I got to step up my pancake game. Now, that's not a bad thing. If I was to
Mhm.
open social media, like my little skit that I did in the beginning, scrolling through and feeling so deflated, if I reenacted that with a completely different mindset, it's time to go on social
Mm.
media. I start to go through. Now I could come from the approach of being happy for other people, encouraging other people, being like, hey, Charla, your studio is beautiful. Love it. Love your plants. Love your sunlight. Like, happy for you. Then I scroll through and see, oh, wow, like so and so is doing so good in their art right now. It shows me like I have some daily practice to do to get
Mhm.
to get myself like to a new level. And
I like to
using
look at that as like a goal post. Like, you can put out a
Yeah,
goal post and say, hey, they're doing it. And I can do it too. They're just a human. They're a
they are
human
just a human.
with the
Yeah.
same things as I have, the same abilities and the same opportunities. So I can also get there
Mhm,
if I
mhm.
want to get there. It's like
Yeah,
a goal
and
post.
using it to aspire to and to
Mhm.
motivate you, I think is a
Yeah.
completely different thing than letting it deflate you. And
Yeah.
so if we come back to childlike ways, I spoke of like the childlike learning by looking around us, but if we come back to a childlike way of saying, I'm going to observe the world around me and all of these humans walking and talking and doing these great things, and I'm just sitting here doing patty cake, then we could begin to aspire to say, I'm going to try this stuff. I'm going to try to stand on my own 2 feet. I'm going to try to get better. I'm going to try to walk and talk and learn like the child does without, I guess, letting ourselves be so deflated that we've got like these, so down on ourselves all the time, because comparison kills creativity.
Mhm.
And instead we
Yeah.
could let it fuel creativity into better things.
And if you think about that metaphor of the child too, you think they're inspired by all the big people they see doing things. So they learn to walk and talk and run and play games, and they learn from us, right?
Mhm.
And we're all big adults far into our life, and you know the impatience of a kid who wants to grow up. But they have 18 years of this growing that they have to do. It's a really long time where they're learning one thing after another so that they can become an adult. But by the time they become like 21, 25, these people that were so far ahead of them start to slow down,
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, I'm looking at my boys. I'm thinking about this just the other day, and they're strong and they're growing. And even their dad is like, I can't even do that anymore. And he's still young and fit, but he can't keep up with his
Yeah.
teenage boys. And he's like, I have to work so much harder to do what you guys are accomplishing overnight. And so these babies who really take them 18 years to become what they're aspiring to be, because they're looking at the goalposts of people in their lives, the adults in their lives.
Mhm.
By the time they get there, the adults are slowing down and they're taking over the world. So really that metaphor is quite powerful, because if
Mhm.
you look at in comparing yourself to somebody that you aspire to be, it's not that I ever want them to fail and me take over from them, but it's kind of the nuance of life. We each have our place in the world,
Yeah.
and that person is here and it's a goalpost, but we're actually going to go here. Maybe we'll
Mhm.
rise up higher than them, we'll go forward more than them, maybe we'll collaborate with them eventually, and
Mhm.
maybe we'll be so far in different corners that it won't
Mhm.
even matter eventually. So if you look at it like a child, they could give up and say, I don't got 18 years to figure out how to run, like,
Mhm.
so I'm just going to sit here and crawl instead, or I'm going to give up and not learn it at all, but they don't do it. They take off and they're willing, they put in
Yeah.
the work
Yeah,
to get there.
my daughter didn't crawl, she scooted like a little monkey. Like, she scooted on her butt, and she skipped crawling and just went from, like, the scoot everywhere to
Yeah.
walking,
To
and so I
walking.
guess that would just show us to do it how you gotta do it. Like,
Yeah.
grow your skill how you gotta do it, but using rather than this negative comparison that deflates you, use it to aspire to and to admire the people
Hmm.
that are going ahead of you, and I see like people who've gone ahead of me, I try to see them as a pioneer.
Yeah.
They're plowing and making way for the ones who are to come, which if I'm growing, it's going to be me. And
Hmm.
so I can be thankful for them. And I also think of like if you look at some people who've gone ahead with like just business success or making ways for artists, like imagine the possibilities we have as artists today because other artists have gone ahead of us and made
Hmm.
this beautiful space for
Yeah.
us in art being recognized the way that it is, and we're changing the stigmas and we're breaking new like out of boxes, right? And
Yeah.
so so much good has come, but it also like there's people that are pioneering for us, and we don't need to
Mm.
compare or be jealous or envious, but rather to be thankful.
Yeah,
And
and to learn from them. And
yeah.
I think one thing I talk about in Bold School is like the reason that I want to teach, and the reason that you and our other instructors are there to teach is because or what I would like for our members to do is to start like we're here. They get to start from here and go up.
Mhm.
They don't have to start from here and build themselves up. There's a certain amount of work
Mhm.
they're going to have to do, but they get to start from our ceiling. And I like to
Yeah.
say that to my kids too, like learn from us so you can start from our ceiling instead of start at the bottom. Like
So
you've got
good.
a heads up right there. So if
Yeah.
you're going to struggle and refuse to acknowledge the people that have gone before us or the people that are ahead of us, then
Mhm.
you are going to struggle and you're going to have to work your way through. Like there's a trail that's been then set out for you, but if you want to walk 10 feet that side in the bush, you're
Mm.
going to go a lot slower. So
Yeah.
step onto the trail and allow them to allow yourself to walk the trail that they've already blazed and learn from them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've heard you say before to use comparison as a barometer. Can you tell me what that means?
Remember, that was an idea I hadn't completely fledged out.
But I liked it. You were onto something good. You were saying
Yeah.
to use it to measure your atmospheric pressure.
Yeah, like I like to think of I'm trying to put that in my head now where I was when I said that. But I like to look at comparison as a baseline, like just seeing like where you're at. In
Mhm.
photography, this is something as a photographer that I learned. I learned photography in school, and then I started shooting for myself outside of school, and I was doing wedding photography, photojournalistic style, in a time when the majority of photographers were still men wearing their vests and lining up people, right? And I was wanting to step out into photojournalism. The web was kind of new at the time, so that I could find some work, but I had no one to learn from, nobody to ask. So I had to figure it out for myself. And I started a business and it was fairly successful. And I had all these systems and processes in place, and I was happy with what I did, but I didn't know if I was doing things right. I didn't know if I was doing things as good as I could, or if there was places where I could be better and have better success or whatever. So I finally had an opportunity to go to a conference where this certain rock star photographer that I followed was going to be teaching at this conference. So I jumped at the opportunity because I followed this guy, loved what he was doing. This was like probably 8 or 9 years into my career at this stage. And I had to fly there, stay in a hotel, you know, big expense, whatever. So I did the conference. And when I came out of it, someone asked me, like, so did you learn anything? What did you learn? I'm like, you know, I actually don't think I learned anything new. This guy used the same equipment as me, the same software, the same systems. And but what happened was that he validated my processes.
Mhm.
So I was able, by comparing myself to him, because he was teaching his processes, I saw where a baseline was, and I was validated in what I was already doing. Obviously he was more successful than me. He was like considered this rock star photographer and people were paying to be taught from him, but I was validated in what I was doing. So I calibrated myself to this guy. I used him as a measure for the things that I was doing. And so I felt, even though I hadn't necessarily learned, like I didn't get 10 new tips to make my photography business better, but I came away feeling really, really good about it.
Mm.
And then I had this idea, like comparison can be like a measure stick, a way to calibrate ourselves, a baseline, like all these types of words. And then I felt it's also like this barometer where you can measure the atmospheric pressure around you.
Mm.
So, and I haven't really like fledged that out yet, but I think there's more to just I compare it to going, I will compare it to going online and looking at other people's work. And you kind of get to see, like, what are other people doing? So I'm doing this now. I go online, I see what other people are doing. I set some goalposts, and then I work and I continue on. And then I need to recalibrate myself. But I need to go online. I need to go out into the world. I need to go to shows, talk to artists, start learning some more, measuring the atmospheric pressure around you. It's a little bit more of a complicated measure. You can't
Mhm.
just say, this is the baseline, so I got to do step 1, 2, 3 to get here. It's
Mhm.
not really that simple. There's a whole lot of stuff coming at you. There's a whole lot of stuff coming at them. Like you said, like we can't compare apples to oranges. So if I'm comparing myself to a 60-year-old man who's been in the business forever and he's super successful because he's gone this like route that I'm never going to take, I
Mhm.
can't measure that. So it's more like atmospheric pressure. You have to be able to calibrate a whole bunch of measurements that are coming at you from all angles. I would use a 60-year-old man who's been in the business for a long time as still like a goalpost to say, I can do it. He's painting bold color portraits and he's succeeding and people are buying them. So there's a market. He did it, so I know I can do it. But
Mhm.
I'm not necessarily going to go down the same path as him or make the same work as him because we're in a very different place in life, very
Mhm.
different place in the world. So I have to measure all of these things that are coming at me. And that's kind of why I feel like it was this barometer came in my mind, because it's measuring the atmospheric pressure that's on you in your time, in your place, on the people around you, and how you're going to make a decision for where you are now. Because a real barometer, is going to measure, if it's in your city, it's going to measure very different than it will in the town next to you or in the town across the world. The atmospheric pressure is going to be very different.
Mhm.
So I understand a
Yeah.
barometer because I have a fisherman for a dad.
Yeah.
So if you don't know what a barometer is, you might need to go and look into how a barometer works
And
to fully
Charlotte's
understand that.
fisherman dad portrait is behind her
Oh
today
yeah,
here on YouTube on
that
the
would
other
be him
side.
there.
Yeah, that is Charlotte's dad, the nicest man in the world. So happy that I've gotten to meet him in person. And so, hi, Charlotte's dad, in
The
case you watch the
fisherman.
podcast.
He used to watch.
Um,
I don't know if he does anymore.
so, comparison is like a barometer. Also, just to sort of sum up or conclude some thoughts about how to stop comparing ourselves negatively, because it's not a they make good art, I make bad art situation. It's a we all make art, we are on our own path, and we need to compare for constructive reasons to gauge, to have that atmospheric
Hmm.
pressure, to understand when we're learning. But one thing that Charla has told me in the past is to use comparison when you're learning something new. So that's a good time to use it, because if you're learning, like
Hmm.
let's say you switch mediums, which I have done a number of times in my life. I've switched mediums. I've moved from, as you all know, if you followed the podcast, I've moved from clay into illustration. When I'm learning that new art form, that new medium, it's not like I'm learning art all over again. It's not like I'm learning creativity all over again, but I'm learning how to use new tools, new medium. And at some
Mhm.
point I have to look up and be like, hey, am I doing what everybody's doing with this watercolor? Like, is this what watercolor actually is? Not that you want to follow exactly what everybody's doing, because that's where innovation comes. You might come up with a whole new way to use a medium. But when you're learning something new, you can get the idea, like, you know, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing here?
Yeah. Well, I
Using
say learn the rules so that you can
You
break the
can break
rules.
them.
That's why
Yeah.
we learn them. So you use comparison to see, did I learn the rules? Like, do I know the rules?
Yeah.
Because you don't know what you don't know. You can't break what you don't know. So learn the rules. If you want to break them, you have to first know what the rules are.
Because here you go. At least you'll know you're breaking the rules. If you don't know the
Yeah.
rules, you don't know you're breaking them.
Yeah.
If you know them, then at least you can be like, I'm breaking it. I'm breaking the
Yeah.
rule. Don't compare for the purpose of validation. So I think that right there is the key to why we get so deflated when we open our social media, because we're actually looking for self-worth from the comparison. And you mentioned that
Mhm.
in the beginning, Charlotte, how like low self-esteem is so affected by this. And if we're opening whatever like avenue of comparison we have, and today we're using social media as the main avenue, but even if you're part of our Bold School community and you are we've welcomed you with open arms, you're part of this community, you're taking Bold School classes, even if you go in our community and begin to compare, we don't want that. We don't want you
Mhm.
looking for validation from your peers to grow your self-esteem. We want you to have self-esteem because you're worth it. You're worth it in every single way. You're valid
Mhm.
just for being you. And the looking and comparing for validation, that's just like a trap, because you are you and meant to be unique in your life, in your art. Do you have something to add to that, Charla? I just
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what you're saying. I was thinking about my example of going to the photography conference because I used the word validation to say that I felt validated by
Yeah.
the processes that they did were the same as mine.
Mhm.
Now, I use that word, but I just want to be clear that had I realized, that their processes were different, then I would have switched my thought to learning from them. Like then I would have been like, hey, well, okay, they're doing it different than me, so now I can learn. I can learn
Mhm.
something new. That's why I'm here anyways.
Mhm.
I compared myself to them and I felt validated because I was doing it the same. So you can feel the validation, but what you have to be really careful is doing it for validation, because what if you're not the same? What if you're doing something different? What if you're not as good? Like there are
Mhm.
people like they just are a better artist than you, possibly because they've been working harder.
Mhm.
Possibly, I don't know, like maybe they have some natural talent that you don't have in one area. Maybe you have it in a different area that you haven't explored yet. There's a whole lot of reasons why an artist could be better than you. It doesn't mean that you don't
Mhm.
have validation in your process or that you shouldn't be doing it, right? So you have to
Yeah.
not do it for validation.
Well, and I thought of something as you were saying that, because I spoke of being in the Bold School community and having this community around you and not having it for validation, but maybe I should clarify to say that validation in art and seeing from your peers that you're on the right track is good, but validation for your self-worth, or if you're looking
Mhm.
for others to constantly put into your self-worth, we will come up empty, because we need to find that between us and God. Like, just
Yeah.
it needs to come from the deep, deep, deep part of us, not looking to Instagram or social media
Mhm.
or an art community. Yet, I have noticed that those communities and building a tribe or a team around yourself does support us in our journey of self-confidence and self-worth. It is so
Mhm.
important, and so many within Bold School will testify to the community
Mhm.
boosting their self-confidence.
Yeah.
But to clarify, like your validation of who you are, you're worth it just in who you are as a human, in being here alive
Mhm.
breathing. You're
Yeah.
valuable.
I actually think that's like probably the real core of this entire topic,
Mhm.
because when we compare ourselves, like a kid comparing themselves to somebody who's able to walk and run and play sports really well, if they decide, a 2-year-old decides that they can't compete with an 8-year-old, and they take it personally,
Mhm.
then most of us would be like, that's crazy. They're 8 and you're 2. You're not gonna be able to do the same thing. And that kid won't naturally take that as though their value is worth less because they can't walk. Most healthy children won't ever naturally think that way. But I
Yeah.
think we as adults will often compare ourselves, not compare. Maybe this is where the apples to apples comes in. We're not comparing our status in our art to somebody else's art. We're actually comparing our personal status to somebody else's, which can never be compared. Our
No.
worth as a human can never be compared. And we're always looking for validation for someone to tell us that we're good just as we are. But we take that with our art, because our art becomes part of our identity,
Mhm.
our creativity becomes part of our identity. So if somebody tells us, or we think our art isn't good enough, we take that as we're not good enough. So
Mhm.
being able to separate that validation and separate what we're actually doing when we're comparing our art is really important. Our art and where we stand in that journey and process is very different to who you are as a human being. You do
Yeah.
not need anything to
Yeah.
validate your worth as a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So we
good.
have to separate that.
So good. Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
feeling
which
it.
is
Like
really
I'm just
hard.
I
It's
know. And I
really
know how
hard.
many times that I have, we've talked about critique before. This is crosses over as something slightly different than comparison, but we've talked about critique, or when you present your
Mhm.
work to the world, or when you put yourself out there that you feel others comparing. We make ourselves vulnerable because we take our art so personally.
Yeah.
And yet you're just saying to have that healthy separation of knowing we're growing our skills, and there's no comparing apples to oranges, and
Yeah.
that our validation comes from deep within. So,
Mhm.
so one other thing that you've said to me before, I know we're concluding here. We don't want to run too far over time, but you've said before, don't ever compare when you're in the innovation stage. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, when you're innovating, so if you're learning and you're learning a skill, you're trying to figure out. So when I wanted to become a bold color portrait artist, I honestly had no idea if it existed. Is there, like, in a sense, on a business perspective, is there a market for this? Will anybody be receptive? So I went online and I researched and I found other bold color, abstract color artists who were painting portraits. And I was like, okay, they look successful. They're interviewed on YouTube or whatever, that there must be a market for it. So um I wanted to see that I not that that validates my idea, but that was a time where I was out there kind of doing some research, like some, you in business you could just like call it your demographics, like checking out your
Yeah. Market
demographics, your
research.
market
Yeah.
research. Yeah, I'm doing my market research just to make sure I'm not wasting my time. I think we talked about this on another podcast actually, with your idea.
Yeah.
But then when you get right down to innovating, you've got an idea, you've got something burning in your soul, and you are ready to create. You've got all the tools, you've practiced, the ideas are like flowing, and you're running into your studio to paint. That is not when you go online to see, has anyone done this before? You
Right.
don't do that. You go in when you're burning with an idea and burning with a desire to create.
Mhm.
Go and create. You're innovating at that time. And that's when going online and comparing yourself, that's what you talked about at the very beginning of the podcast. That's when you become completely deflated and you think that your idea is not good enough. And it's usually not, it's nonsensical, because you're so vulnerable in that moment of
Yeah.
innovation, that, and that like you're opening yourself up to things. And so to go and compare yourself in that moment is going to cause like unrealistic comparisons, because the
Mhm.
slightest thing can deflate you when you're that vulnerable. That it hits a nerve so easily when you're being really vulnerable in a creative, innovative state. So
Yeah.
I think it's really important to not compare at that time. Allow yourself to flow and to get it all out. And if you need to, go compare afterwards, but
Yeah.
allow yourself to get it done first. I
Yeah,
think is
and
important.
you know, so I had mentioned the tip to use comparison when you're learning something new and when you're
Mhm.
maybe switching into a new medium, but then we're also saying don't compare during the innovation stage. So there's actually a difference between that creative innovation that's completely fresh and something that you're bringing out your uniqueness and
Mhm.
the learning something new, which is skill-based process. So one
Mhm.
is good to compare and to be like, am I building skills that other people in this genre are building? And then
Mhm.
the other is like, if you have a bubble of creativity and innovation going on, make it. Don't look
Yeah.
around because it'll be
Yeah.
totally new and just for you.
Yeah.
So I think some of what we're describing, Charla, is intuition and trusting
Mhm.
ourselves to
Yes.
discern
Yeah.
like when to compare and remembering how to approach it with the right mindset.
And
I've
trust that you have the ability to problem solve, which is what we talked
mm,
about in our last podcast, that you have the ability to problem solve when you get stuck. I was just thinking as you were talking, the example of I've had many times in my studio where I've gone in with great ideas and I start painting and I probably hit the ugly stage, which we've talked about in previous podcasts as well. It's just the middle of the painting where, you know, it's all over the place and your ideas are coming together, but they're not quite there, and you start to doubt everything you know.
mhm, mhm.
And I have often in that moment said to myself, well, I'll just go on social media and maybe I'll be inspired to like add something in,
Yeah.
you know, from an artist I
And
love.
then it goes, "Meow."
Oh, way down, way fast. Because
Yeah.
as soon as you look at a finished, complete painting that somebody liked enough to post on social media, and you're looking at your half done idea, you're done for. And
Yeah.
that has happened to me more than once. Even knowing that that's
Yeah.
a trap, I still have done it. So this is a really, really big one. When you go in the studio to make an actual painting, you need to put your phone away except for listening for music or whatever, but
Yeah.
do not allow
And I've
yourself to go
said
on
before
Instagram.
too that I don't compare mid-project. So you're talking about maybe painting in the middle of a painting, but some of my artistic projects are like months long because like if
Mhm.
I'm illustrating a children's picture book or something, it's a long, 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 long
Yeah,
process.
that's harder.
And
Yeah.
I'm very careful to not okay, so in this regard, I'm not necessarily meaning compare, but even getting inspired by another illustrator will
Mhm.
influence my style a bit because I'm like, "Ooh, I like the way they did that." And if I take too much influence, because I'm a bit like a sponge, I can sponge it all up, I will change styles mid-project.
Yes, that's what I do in my studio too. That's
Yeah.
what it causes me to do because I think I see like even if it's just a color, I'm like, well, they succeeded there and they did it with purple.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to put purple in, but my color theory falls apart because I'm
Yeah.
just being stupid in that moment. They took me off
So
track.
so it's true when I'm in a long project or any kind of project, really, I have to be really careful not to be influenced, which is different
Yeah.
than comparison, but it's kind of the same because you begin to look and you're like, "Oh, cool. That
The
looks good."
comparison influences you.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
can feel
absolutely.
positive. It can feel okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it affects
Trick
your work, and
you.
then suddenly, like, you're flipping through my book, and it's like, "Whoa, something changed," and I don't want
Yeah.
that to happen. I wanna be consistent with what I produce,
Yeah.
so I have to be careful to, like, protect myself from influences in the middle of projects, and then the project
It's
closes,
really
I can
important.
burst out, get all kinds of new inspiration and
Mhm.
ideas and practice and that kind of thing, but then I have to almost go into a cave when I'm making,
Mhm.
making art. So,
Yeah.
in conclusion of today's podcast, Charlotte, do you have anything else that you want to just wrap up with?
I mean, I think I'd like to have a summary of all these points because I think we've made a really good, a lot of
Well,
really
check
good
out our
points.
show notes and we'll
Yes.
summarize them to the best that we
Yeah.
can because we've talked about use comparison when you learn something new, use it as a baseline, as like that barometer that Charlotte
Mhm.
described. We've talked about don't compare apples to oranges and to not compare for identity
Yeah, a big
validation,
one.
but rather for more of like skill building validation, but not
Mhm.
identity validation. And don't compare during the innovation stage.
Mhm.
Make sure that you recognize how it influences you, how it'll
Yeah.
change the course of your style if you're doing that. And we've talked, Charlotte and I have talked before about putting on armor before you go online, like mental armor,
Really important.
where
Yeah.
you like take 10 seconds to mentally prepare that you're going in the comparison zone. Like
Protect
it's
your spirit,
the
protect your
battlefield
heart.
of the
Yeah.
mind where you're going
Yes.
into this comparison zone. So you tell
Yeah.
yourself to go in with the right attitude, encouraging attitude towards other people rather than me, or poor me, poor me.
Yeah.
I can fall into the
Yeah.
poor me drop. And then identify also, here's a good key, identify which of the platforms lifts you up.
Yeah.
So like, some of the, not all social media is created equal, like, it's not an apple to apple situation. And so look for a place, a community, a tribe that lifts you up, that you might need less armor to go
Yeah.
in and be on those platforms. And then if you're having a bad day, and if socials gives you bad days, just don't go on to those platforms when you're in that frame of mind, because you just want to
Mhm.
protect yourself. You're important, your
Mhm.
art matters, and your creativity matters. And we care that you're a wholehearted artist.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's a good idea to have a private community, because we like to say that community is the new social media, because in
Yeah.
times like that, you can go into a private community and get support that you need rather than just scrolling on a social media platform,
Yeah. Just
which all
mindlessly
have
scroll.
good points and they're good places to be at certain times, but community is one of the best places to be for your innovation stage, because
Mhm.
they can lift you up even
Well,
better.
it's the whole reason we started the Bold School community, is that it was the
Yeah.
new social media for us, because this talk, this issue, this needing armor to go on to the platforms has been something that we wanted to solve for other artists, a safe place
Mm,
that you can come be part of, not only your skills being validated, but you are important, you're validated just for
yeah.
being who you are. So thank you so much for joining us today on the show, the Bold Artist Podcast. We're so happy that you're here on the Bold School channel on YouTube. You can find us on Instagram, Bold School Inc. And make sure that you're on our newsletter. It is informative, fun, interesting. I love it when it shows up in my inbox. Get on our newsletter list by going to boldschool.com and putting your name in there. And we've got weekly updates and all kinds of things happening, letting you know when our classes are out. And what else can I say? It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining the show. And until next time, keep creating.